The first time I suspected something, I wanted to believe it was just stress. But by the time I hired a private investigator, I knew. What I didn't know was how far the betrayal went, or how far I'd go to take back control of my life. This is the story of how I uncovered the truth, and how it changed everything. The weight of betrayal still lingered in Kurt's mind, suffocating him as he sat in his dimly lit living room. His surroundings, the familiar walls of his home, seemed to close in on him, the silence almost deafening. The divorce papers from Catherine had arrived just a few days ago, yet the emotional pain felt as raw as if it had happened moments ago. The sharp sting of hurt was compounded by an overwhelming desire for revenge. He could feel it inside him, a burning rage that seemed to consume every thought, every moment. It wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't even the fire she had set in his garage, destroying his precious safe haven. It was something far deeper than that, something that cut into the core of his being. His childhood memories resurfaced, moments he had locked away for years, memories of his father's betrayal that haunted him. His father's frequent absences, the unexplained late nights, and the lingering smell of cheap perfume on his shirts, they were all pieces of a puzzle he had tried desperately to ignore. His father's actions had forever changed the way Kurt viewed love, trust, and loyalty. Growing up in that environment, he learned early on that betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was a guarantee. It was a lesson that had shaped his adult life, his relationships, and his understanding of what it meant to truly trust someone. Kurt had always sworn he would never fall victim to that same kind of betrayal. He promised himself that he would never repeat his father's mistakes, never allow someone to break his trust the way his father had shattered his mother's. And yet, here he was, sitting in the aftermath of his own painful discovery, wondering how he had ended up in this exact situation. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him in the most devastating way. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the fire. It was everything. The betrayal felt like a hammer crushing the very foundation of his beliefs, his values. He had thought he knew what love was, what loyalty was, but now, it all seemed like an illusion, something he had been clinging to desperately, unaware that it was all falling apart around him. The realization hit him hard. He couldn't let this define him. He couldn't allow Catherine's actions to control his life the way his father's had controlled his mother's. He had to take control. He had to find a way to move forward, even if that meant letting go of everything he had believed in. As he sat in the silence of his living room, the divorce papers in front of him, Kurt made a decision. He wouldn't let the betrayal break him. He wouldn't let it destroy him the way his father's actions had destroyed his mother. He would take control, just as he always had. The emotional weight was unbearable, but with each passing moment, he realized that there was no other choice. He could either stay trapped in the pain, consumed by anger and betrayal, or he could move forward, reclaim his life, and build something new. The choice was his. And so, Kurt made a vow to himself. He wouldn't let the betrayal define him. He would walk away, not as a victim, but as a man who had been through the fire and come out the other side stronger. There would be no reconciliation. There would be no going back. He would never allow anyone to control his life again. In the days that followed, as Kurt wrestled with his emotions and the overwhelming sense of loss, he began to realize something profound. This wasn't just about Catherine's betrayal. It was about him. About his own journey, his own healing. The process wouldn't be easy, but it would be necessary. He had to face his past, confront the wounds left by his father's betrayal, and come to terms with the fact that love, trust, and loyalty were not as simple as he had once believed. It would take time. But the first step was already done. He had made the decision to move forward, to reclaim his life, to stop letting the past dictate his future. As he walked away from the wreckage of his marriage, Kurt couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk. The emotional turmoil he had endured would not be in vain. With each step, he would rebuild. The past would always be a part of him, but it would no longer define him. He was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, there was always the possibility of light. And this time, he would find it for himself. The journey wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The sound of my phone ringing sliced through the silence of my office, a sharp reminder that the calm facade of my life was beginning to crumble. I picked it up without thinking, the number unfamiliar, but as the voice on the other end spoke, I immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. "This isn't your wife, Mr. Taylor. My name is Michael Hamilton, and I need to speak with you." I was stunned. Michael continued, his tone businesslike but tinged with a sense of urgency. "I have information about your wife. It's something you should hear directly from me." My heart skipped a beat. Jod. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone, the one who had become my everything. Could there be something I didn't know? "Can you meet me this afternoon?" Michael's request was simple, but the weight of his words loomed large in my mind. "Yes," I said, the word leaving my mouth before I had time to process the implications. I agreed to meet him at noon outside Spike's, a small diner on the edge of town. As I arrived, Michael was already waiting, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if he were expecting someone to be watching. We exchanged pleasantries, but there was no time for small talk. He led me down the street, urging me to keep walking as he spoke in hushed tones, clearly wary of being overheard. "Your wife," Michael began, his voice low but firm, "has been spending a lot of time with a man named Stan Morrison from her office. They've been meeting regularly for lunch. Today, they were openly discussing their plans for tomorrow night, a dinner at the Hilton, followed by dancing and spending the night together." I stopped in my tracks, my stomach twisting as if I'd been punched. The words hit me like a tidal wave, a rush of disbelief flooding my senses. "Are you telling me they're sleeping together?" I managed to choke out. Michael nodded, his face grim. "Yes. Your wife has already made reservations. She's out shopping for clothes right now for their date." A cold numbness settled over me. I could barely process the reality of what he was saying. This couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. Jod, my Jod, had always been loyal. This was a cruel joke. But as the pieces of Michael's words began to form a coherent picture, I couldn't deny the growing sense of betrayal. My mind raced, the old wounds of my parents' broken marriage flashing before me. How could she? How could she do this to me? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, struggling to maintain my composure. The air between us felt thick with unspoken emotions. Michael's expression hardened, and his voice became more intense. "Because I've been where you are. I was married for 9 years. My wife had an affair. The legal system failed me. I don't want that for you. You deserve the truth." His words hit home harder than I wanted to admit. I had heard stories like this before, but never thought it would happen to me. Betrayal was something other people dealt with, not me, not my perfect marriage. But now, as I stood in the middle of the street, trying to process the information, the reality of the situation was undeniable. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice shaky, betraying the turmoil within me. "You act," Michael replied, his voice steady. "You confront her. It won't be easy, but it's the only way you'll ever find peace." The walk to Central Park felt endless. Each step seemed to weigh me down more as my mind spiraled. The thoughts clashed within me, anger, confusion, disbelief. I thought about confronting Jod right then, asking her to explain herself. But the thought of seeing her, hearing her deny everything, made my stomach churn. What if Michael was right? What if she was really doing this? How could I confront her without knowing the full truth? I needed more than just Michael's word. I needed confirmation. My decision was made, I had to find out for myself. I would take action, but cautiously. I hired a private investigator, someone I could trust to get the facts, no matter how painful they might be. After an initial meeting and an exchange of money that felt far too high, I felt the familiar, gnawing anxiety in the pit of my stomach. This was really happening. My marriage, the life I had built, was on the verge of falling apart. I returned home that night, trying to act normal as Jod greeted me with a kiss, unaware that my world had just been shattered. She smiled at me, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for the lies I was about to tell. Dinner was uneventful, though I could barely taste the food. My mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Michael, to the images of Jod and Stan together. How long had this been going on? What was I missing? The more I thought about it, the more the urge to confront her became overpowering. But if I was going to confront her, I needed proof. I needed the full story. At 11 p.m., I went upstairs to bed, still wrestling with the overwhelming shock. Jod was already asleep. I showered and lay awake, unable to sleep. My mind raced with questions, scenarios, and painful memories of betrayal. This wasn't how I had imagined my life turning out. The following day, I followed through with the plan. The investigator had done his job, and I had the confirmation I needed. The video footage was undeniable. Jod and Stan had been more than just colleagues. They were deeply involved. The evidence was in front of me, and yet, I still found myself struggling with the reality of what it meant for my marriage. When I finally confronted Jod, I could see the shock in her eyes. She tried to deny everything, to downplay the significance of what she had done, but I couldn't listen to her excuses anymore. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "I'm done," I said, the finality in my words echoing through the silence of our home. "If you go through with this, our marriage is over." She had the audacity to tell me it was just one night. But for me, it was much more than that. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever imagined. That night, I made the decision to move forward. I gathered up her things, cleared out her belongings from our home, and set them aside in the garage. The pain was suffocating, but I couldn't keep living in the lie. The woman I loved was no longer the person I thought I knew. As I closed the door on our shared life, I realized that moving on was my only option. The path ahead was uncertain, and the pain would not disappear overnight, but I was done waiting for answers. I had made my decision, and now I had to follow through. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of work and daily life, but the truth of what had happened still clung to me, a constant reminder of the devastation. As I looked back at the life I had built, I knew I had to let go. Letting go of Jod was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most necessary. In the end, confronting the truth had been the only way for me to reclaim my life. And as painful as it was the first step towards healing. In the days following the discovery of Jod's betrayal, the weight of the situation pressed down on me like an unrelenting storm. Every moment felt like I was walking through a fog of confusion, anger, and the harsh reality that the woman I had trusted and built a life with was living a lie. But I couldn't simply rush into a confrontation. No, I needed more than just words, I needed the truth. The kind of truth that would force her to see the damage she had caused and provide me with the clarity to move forward. I hired a private investigator. The decision was easy in some ways. After all, I had to know if what I'd heard was true, but it was also one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Trust had been shattered, and now I had to rely on someone else to find the evidence to confirm the betrayal. The investigator laid out a plan: surveillance on Jod, following her every move, documenting any interactions with Stan. I knew that once the proof was in front of me, there would be no going back. It felt like I was signing a contract with my own emotional destruction, but the need for closure overshadowed any fear of the pain that might follow. For the next few days, I vacillated between confrontation and waiting for the investigator's final report. There was a part of me that wanted to confront her immediately, to tear into her and demand answers, but that wouldn't give me the clarity I needed. No, I had to be smart. I couldn't let my anger dictate my actions. I had to approach this from a place of strategy, not emotion. Each night, as I lay in bed next to Jod, I would stare at the ceiling, wrestling with my thoughts. The coldness of the betrayal chilled me, but it wasn't just the affair that cut the deepest. It was the realization that everything I had believed in, every promise we made, every hope for the future, was built on a lie. The emotional strain was beginning to take its toll. Every conversation with Jod, every routine act of affection, felt like a cruel performance. I smiled when she kissed me. I played the part of the unsuspecting husband, but inside, I was boiling with rage. Every laugh, every casual remark, only deepened the void between us. I had to remind myself constantly that I was playing a role. I was waiting for the moment when the investigator would hand me the proof I needed to finally confront her with the undeniable truth. Days passed, and finally, the investigator called with the news. The footage was ready. I met him that afternoon, my heart pounding as I took the package. I knew what was inside, but the rawness of seeing it all unfold on tape hit me like a freight train. There she was, walking toward the car with Stan, her hand brushing against his in a way that spoke volumes. I watched as they kissed, passionately, like nothing else in the world mattered. The truth, laid out in front of me, was undeniable. She had crossed a line I could never forgive. It was over. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. My mind raced, but I knew that I had to keep calm. I had to be methodical in how I approached her. The decisions now were no longer about her, they were about me, about what I was willing to accept in my life moving forward. I wasn't going to allow her to continue this charade. I wasn't going to play the fool. It was time to act. When she came home that evening, I was ready. She walked in, dressed up, looking as beautiful as ever, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. She casually mentioned her plans for the night, dinner with Stan. The nonchalance with which she spoke, as if nothing had changed, made my blood boil. I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted her right there, in the doorway. I told her I knew everything, about the affair, about the lies. Her response was as dismissive as I had feared. She tried to downplay it, laugh it off, as if I were overreacting. The nerve. I couldn't believe how little she seemed to care. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I told her, flatly, that if she left, there would be no coming back. If she walked out that door, it was over for good. She laughed, thinking I was bluffing. But I wasn't. This was it. I was done. She didn't take me seriously. As she headed for the door, I warned her again, if she left, it was over. I didn't wait to see if she got into the car. I didn't need to. I had said what I needed to say, and I was finished. The following days were a blur. Anger, confusion, and the cold rush of relief mixed together. I had finally confronted her, finally uncovered the truth. The relief of knowing where I stood was overwhelming, even if it came at the cost of everything I had built. I felt a weight lift off my chest as I realized that I no longer had to wonder. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. I was free to move on. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything. The investigator's work was done, and now it was up to me to decide what came next. I couldn't help but think about the past, the pain, the heartbreak, the lies. But I also realized that this was my chance for a new beginning. The next chapter of my life was waiting for me, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it.